Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McGonville. Another watch review, another Alpina, and today it's another diver. So today we're going to do a review of the Alpina Seastrong Heritage Diver. So as always, my review is going to focus on how successful the watch is at being what it intends to be. So in this case, the Alpina Seastrong Heritage is really expected to be a dressy tool watch, and I'm going to measure it by that standard. And I'm going to do so by looking at generally two things. How is the design, so how does it look? And then the execution. How successful were the watchmakers and the engineers in turning those drawings into something real? Okay, so the first thing is, what's it trying to be? A dressy tool watch, able to be worn all day, every day, no matter where you are. There's three real criteria for that. One is it's got to be wearable. It's got to fit well and a broad range of people, and it's got to be comfortable to wear. The second thing is it has to have a little bit of class. If you're going to wear it every day, and I'm assuming that will mean in the office with a suit or out to dinner in more formal occasions. So it's got to have a bit of class to carry that off. It's also got to be able to be worn back down to the tiki bar at the end of the hard day of conferences and not look out of place while you're wearing your Hawaiian shirt and Bermuda shorts. So it needs a little bit of flair as well. It's a tricky road to run, and let's see how the Alpina goes. Okay, so we'll start by looking at the wearability. I think this will suit a wide array of wrists. In terms of dimensions, it's case width of 42 millimeters, lug to lug of 50 millimeters, and it's just 12 millimeters thick. That's probably right in the middle of the sweet spot for most divers. To put this in perspective, I suppose you could say that the archetypal dressy tool watch would be something like the Rolex Datejust. And so from that one, that's a 41 millimeter case with 11 millimeters thick. So what I would say is that really tells us that this is a watch from a wearability point of view is right in the ballpark you'd expect it to be. Okay, it is a very thin watch, which adds to its wearability, and like many Alpinas, it has some tricks up its sleeve to try and enhance that wearability. It's quite, as I said, it's quite thin, especially for a diver. It's got these quite low set and aggressively angled lugs, which give you a real wrap around the wrist, so it sits nicely, despite perhaps the straight numbers telling you it's going to be quite big. And also, there's nothing in here which is sharp or uncomfortable. The lugs, as I said, wrap around a fair bit, wrap around your wrist, and there's nothing in there which is going to rub, chafe, or cut to be any kind of irritant. I've certainly found I can wear this watch all day, every day, and it's just beautiful to wear. Okay, so as far as having that little touch of class and dignity, I think this watch is really helped out by the super compressor style case, which will always have that kind of an element of formality missing in a more standard diver. Okay, so we've got some really clean, classy colorways. I've got the ivory or off-white dial. There is another one which comes in a deep blue and black. Simple, no nonsense batten indices, no massive lume-filled caverns here to sort of shout and scream. It's very, again, it's very formal and very elegant. Again, this notion of what the super compressor imposes on the watch is it imposes a very coherent design. All the shapes and the lines and the joins have to work together for the super compressor to actually function. And what that means is you end up with a very, as I said, coherent, symmetrical, proportionate case where the engineering has really driven some just a very pleasant case to look at. And that's finished off with some just subtle sort of shaping and finishing here and there. One of the things I'd note is the profile shaping. If you look at the watch from the side, there's just below the crystal, the bezel, the exterior bezel loops over a little bit, then leading to the doming of the crystal, and that sort of gradual progression means you're not stuck with a big slab side. So even though the watch is 12 millimeters thick, it will slide under a shirt cuff very easily because of the shaping of that profile. Okay, gotta go with it, gotta say it. It is a terrible date location. Having that date kind of drifting somewhere between the 3 and the 4 is extremely off-putting the first time you see it. It is funny though, I must admit. I found myself, I really now only think about it when I have to talk about the watch. When I'm wearing it, it kind of drifts back and I stop caring about it so much. You just get used to where it is. And it does, paradoxically, it is kind of in line and symmetrical now with the crown that is also drifting somewhere between that 3 and 4. So perhaps it's that by being in line with the crown, it kind of ameliorates some of the weirdness of floating where it does relative to the indices. I'm not trying to make too many excuses. I would have much preferred they'd be able to put that at the 6 o'clock. I don't know why they put it there, but rest assured, take it away from this review cycle, start wearing the watch on your wrist, and it does seem to just drift to the back of your mind and stop bothering you a bit. That said, while the location is terrible, the actual integration of the date is really quite nice, quite classy little border around the date window, and yet because of the way that bordering sort of matches the rest of the style of what's going on the watch, it kind of drifts away and you don't notice the date until you go to look at it, and then you can find it and see it quite easily. So from that point of view, whilst I hate the location of the date window, they've actually integrated it quite well into the dial, and it hides when you don't want it and pops when you do. That's kind of the perfect way a date to be. Okay, so to be a true everyday watch, as I've said before, the watch has to be just as home in the tiki bar or by the side of the pool as it is in the boardroom or or at the dinner table. And so you need a little bit of flair to carry that off. That is certainly this watch's like second fiddle. It's not its real game, but it does pretty well. Some of the features that you'll notice would be, for example, the heritage hands, which add a little bit of fun and playfulness. The really gentle, something that I actually had to get a loop out to check. There's this really gentle doming of the dial at the point where it sort of creases down and meets the bezel, and it creates this really lovely subtle effect of three-dimensionality without screaming that I've been bent and folded. It's really quite subtle and quite beguiling almost, and that's all similarly to the way that the sunburst works on the dial. Again, I'm probably not going to be able to capture this. I've yet to capture it well on video or in photos, but in real life there's this really subtle satiny sheen to the dial that really gives it a bit of class and a bit of flair all at the same time. It's really beautifully done. We've got these long, slender, shapely lugs that sort of curve athletically away from the case, which again doesn't yell and scream and shout, but just adds that little bit of design flair to an otherwise simple round case. The two crowns are nicely finished. Each feature their own little engraving or embossing on the end to set them off and make them a little bit different. This watch comes with a solid case back. Ideally, I really like watches, particularly at this entry level where a lot of people are buying their first mechanical. I like having display case back so that people just joining this field can sort of see what they're getting. Having said that, this is a heritage diver, and the display, the embossing on the case back of the traditional three mountains, echoing the Alpina sort of emblems going way back to the early 1900s, is kind of cool, and it's very nicely done. Okay, so that's really it for the design. Now let's talk about the execution of the watch. Let's start with the movement. The movement's an AL525, which is actually, if you dig down deep enough, a Sellita SW200, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. That is, in fact, probably the perfect movement for this watch. Solid, reliable, will last as long as you do, and if it does need to be serviced, it can be serviced absolutely anywhere. It is the perfect choice for this watch. Okay, then let's talk about the band. Now, I haven't got the band on this watch that it came with. It comes with a very nice, well bolstered leather band with a really nice little clasp on the end with a again, an engraving of the Alpina, very subtly and off-centered slightly. Nothing wrong with the band at all. I wore the band for probably a good 12 months after I got this watch, but I just do love my NATOs, and so and particularly in summer I like NATOs on my watches, so it's got a NATO on it now. Okay, so if you look at the build, okay, basically we can't fault it. It is ultimately a diver. I haven't spoken at all about how well it does that job, and I'm not really going to. It has a 300 meter water resistance, and I think that tells you everything you're going to need to know about its robustness. So I don't think you'd have to worry about the durability of this watch at all. Everything's neat and clean. Everything lines up nicely. The threads on both crowns feel lovely and smooth. There's no grittiness or grindiness. They engage easily. Okay, so that's it. Now let's look about where we fit in the marketplace. MSRP on this watch is $1,550 US, but you won't pay that, which is weird because it can actually be quite difficult to find this watch. But when it is on, and it's quite often out of stock, but even then when it does come into stock, you won't be paying the MSRP. Routinely you'll get this watch for around about $1,100. I think you can get it for about $10.50 at the moment on Joma Shop, and another store I use has it for about $9.90 US at the moment. So that's probably about what you'd expect to pay. As far as alternatives go, there are two really obvious alternatives, and one of them is just like clearly the same watch almost, and that's the Longines Legend Diver. Now the first thing to note about that is that's a $2,400 watch, and you'll rarely if ever spend less than $1,700 to buy that. So that's going to be routinely 70 to 80% more expensive than your Alpina. The paradox is, I think, that it's actually a more modern looking watch, and therefore it's actually less distinctive and less interesting. Whereas the Alpina is quite clearly an old heritage piece brought forward, and which shows in everything from its hands to its indices to its design. Well, so Longines is definitely still that brings a little bit of that heritage feel by virtue of being a compressor style diver. Everything else is actually quite modern. Back in the day, I can imagine it must have been quite a futuristic looking watch. Unfortunately, what that means is in 2019, it kind of blends in more than you might expect a heritage piece to do so. The other one, more price competitive, would clearly be the Ward C65 Diver. Now there's two variants to this. There's the 65 and then there's the heritage. The 65 or MSRP is around about $2,300, but you'll pick that up for about $1,400. The heritage is around about $2,100, and you can pick those up for about $1,200. So they're both more expensive than the Alpina, and in both cases the design's a bit more playful, a bit more fun, but ultimately a bit less versatile. Personally, I think both of these watches, the designs are a little bit unresolved. It seems like there's too many options in some cases, and so in order to make all the various options work, they've had to make some choices which have compromised every option. So for example, you've got the green dials and the blue dials and black dials and Dauphine coloured dial or Deauville coloured dials, but beneath that you've always got this black bezel, and it just looks off. Back in car days, they used to, back in the 60s, 70s and 80s, they would often build what were called parts bin specials. Cars that were kind of cobbled together from the little bits and pieces that were left over at the end of model runs. And I get that feeling with the Ward C65s. It's like this, no one sat down and designed the whole watch. They just had bits and pieces and put it all together, and it doesn't feel like a single coherent watch to me. Okay, some not so obvious watches, choices. The first would be another Longines, the Longines Skin Diver. Brand spanking new watch. I think it came out in 2018 or maybe early 2019. MSRP of $2,200 and I haven't seen it cheaper than that anywhere. It's actually stunningly similar to look at to the Ward C65 and actually comes with exactly the same drawbacks I think I mentioned up about the RS65. Kind of more fun, more playful, but ultimately less versatile than the Alpina. And again, it's got that kind of parts bin look, as though they've taken parts that were all meant for different watches and then put them together here. My final alternative, and for me the cleanest and clearest alternative to the Alpina, is actually the Christopher Ward C65 automatic. You can buy these off the Christopher Ward website. Depending on the option, you're going to pay somewhere between $900 US and $1,000 US. So it's bang on the same price as the Alpina. Very similar to the Alpina in size. I think it's 0.5 millimeter here or there is different. Very similar specs, same movement inside. Interestingly, this one, even though it looks much more like a traditional diver, actually only has 150 meter water resistance, which was an odd choice for Christopher Ward here. The other thing is too, it can look very reminiscent of other watches. I don't see this, the Christopher Ward, as a homage to any particular watch, but when you look at it, you see it's like you do see in the design clear references to a range of other watches. And finally, that bezel and the color is a little bit more kind of pleasure than business. So whilst I genuinely do like it, I really like the look of the C65, and it's a watch that's on my list, although I'll probably buy the GMT version. As far as sort of matching up with the Alpina for this all day, everyday business room to pool deck kind of watch, I think you're going to be far more pool deck, far less boardroom with the C65. Okay, so the takeaway is that in like 2015, 2016, Alpina had found its footing. It knew where it wanted to go, and it wanted to be this kind of restrained, dressy tool watch that was still sporty. And I think that was the perfect environment for them to try and re-release the original Seastrong 10. And they've absolutely nailed it. I think they've updated that original design very nicely, making very small changes, but really, except in the areas of things like sizing, where they've given it a more modern sizing. The Alpina has a really distinct personality. It is very clearly its own watch. If it is a homage to anything, it is a homage to its own grandfather. And I think we can always forgive that a little bit. And so ultimately, I cannot recommend this watch highly enough. I stumbled upon this watch, funnily enough, while actually going to buy the Longines Legend, and I saw this and just bought it and haven't looked back since. This is a watch for the person who really wants to stand out, who wants something that's different but doesn't want it to be obvious that you're standing out. It's a watch for the person who is coolly and with impeccable class, just finding their own way. This is a watch that I love and I highly recommend for everyone in every case. There are better watches if you want to just be playful. There are better watches if you want to just be dressy. I really struggle to think of anything that can do both of those jobs better than this watch. Highly recommend it. Anyway, so that's really it. I hope this was helpful. If it was, please like the video. If it wasn't, if there's other things you'd like to know, please leave a comment and I'll try and get back to you. I am trying to build this channel, so please subscribe if you'd like to hear more of this sort of thing. And I'll see you later. Thank you.